Hi, my name is Marianne Warda, and I'm going to be sharing a brief overview of the Old Testament. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He created the stars, the moon, the sea, and mankind. He created man in his image, and he said all things are good. God first created Adam, then Eve, and they dwelt with him in the garden in perfect unity. And there was a tree in the middle of the Garden of Eden. It was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God gave specific instructions to Adam to not eat the fruit of this tree, or he would die. And in Genesis chapter 3, here comes the serpent, the most cunning of all the wild animals. And he begins to deceive Eve. He tells Eve, "You're not going to die if you eat the fruit from this tree. You're going to be like God." And Eve was tempted. So she and Adam both ate the fruit. And at that very moment, man fell. Adam and Eve chose to do what they wanted with their free will, which resulted in complete rebellion against God. When Adam and Eve ate the fruit, God had to remove them from the garden. They lose their intimacy with God. Everything gets cursed, and sin enters the world. We read in Genesis chapter 3, verse 21, that God made skin coats for Adam and Eve after they ate the fruit and realized that they were naked. The coats of animal skins are understood as a symbolic representation of the need for an animal sacrifice to atone for human sin. The skin coats also demonstrate God's love, forgiveness, and willingness to care for humans even when we turn our backs on him. And finally, and most importantly, we read that God makes a promise that he will put hostility between the serpent and the woman, stating that the offspring of the woman will crush the serpent's head. So even after the fall, Adam and Eve still had hope because God's promise signified a future victory over evil. After the fall, sin continued to grow, and mankind became so corrupt and full of destruction. Genesis chapter 6 recounts how fallen angels, or the sons of God, were enchanted by the beauty of human women. So they had children with them, resulting in the Nephilim. The Nephilim were giant, powerful offspring born from the union between the sons of God and human women. At this point, mankind has turned so far from God's original design that he decides to flood the earth to destroy the widespread violence and wickedness. But God decides to have mercy on us, so God chooses a man named Noah and establishes a covenant with him. And God instructs Noah to build an ark to save his family and several animals from a worldwide flood. God loved Noah because he was a righteous man, which is why he was spared from the great flood and chosen to continue the human race. So Noah and his 7 family members and the animals survived the great flood, and God makes a promise that he will never flood the earth again with a rainbow. After the flood, Noah's family ultimately end up committing sin, and the corruption in the world continues. This brings us to the Tower of Babel, where the people of Babylon create a new invention, the brick, and they are able to build so quickly, and they want to build a great tower to reach the heavens. But God changes their one language into many languages so they can't communicate, and he scatters them across the earth. God chose Abraham amongst the scattered people. And God makes a covenant with Abraham and says, "For I will make you a father of many nations, and I'm going to send my blessing to the earth through your family, and your descendants will inherit my land." God then blesses Abraham with a son named Isaac, and in order to test the faith of Abraham, God commands him to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice. And as Abraham is about to sacrifice his son, a messenger from God stops him and says, "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Now I know you fear God." And Abraham sees a ram and sacrifices it instead. When Isaac grew up, he then had a son named Jacob. And Jacob is a very interesting character. After stealing his brother's birthright, Jacob then wrestles with God in human form. And for this, God blesses Jacob by promising him that a great nation would come from him. And God gave him the new name, Israel, which means he struggles with God. So Jacob, who is now called Israel, later has 12 sons who become the 12 tribes of Israel. One of Israel's 12 sons is Joseph, and Joseph is Israel's favorite son, and all of his brothers are jealous because their father loves him the most. So they began scheming a plan to try to get rid of Joseph, and they end up throwing him in a pit and selling him into slavery in Egypt. Joseph, who was sold into slavery, ends up being second in command in Egypt through a series of crazy events. Joseph ends up interpreting a dream of Pharaoh's about a famine in Egypt and ends up saving everybody, including his brothers, from starvation. This is where Joseph says, "What the enemy intended for evil, God intended for good." This is a story about a guy who was sold into slavery by his own brothers and ends up saving the entire nation of Egypt. Now, 400 years go by, and we read in Exodus 1:8 that a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. There was a new pharaoh in Egypt who hated the Israelite immigrant group because they were increasing in number and living well. Pharaoh has no knowledge or connection to how Joseph, who was an Israelite, saved all of Egypt from extinction 400 years prior. And the Israelites are so oppressed by the new pharaoh, and he decides to enslave them. He hates the Israelite people so much that he eventually says he is going to kill every male Israelite that is born. And one day, a baby boy named Moses is born. And Moses' mother puts him in a basket to save him from Pharaoh's decree. So she releases him into the Nile River, and out of all the people, Pharaoh's daughter finds baby Moses floating in the water and ends up raising him as her own son. As Moses grew up in Pharaoh's palace, he noticed that the Israelites were horribly mistreated, and that really bothered him. And one day, Moses witnessed an Egyptian taskmaster beating an Israelite slave, and he gets so angry that he kills the Egyptian master. Then he runs because of his shame. And 40 years go by, and he is alone in the wilderness, and God appears to him through a burning bush and says, "Moses, Moses, I see the oppression of my people, and I have mercy for them. So go now, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt." So Moses goes back to Egypt to free his people from slavery, and crazy things are happening due to Pharaoh's hardened heart. God sends 10 plagues to the Egyptians, which included the death to the firstborn son of every household. This is where God instructs the Israelites to sacrifice the perfect lamb and paint its blood on their doorframes. God promised the people that if they followed these instructions, the plague would pass over their homes and spare them. So this finally gets Pharaoh's attention, and Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt through the parting of the Red Sea. Once the Israelites were free, God said to Moses, "You led the people out of Egypt. Now get ready to lead them to the land I promised to their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." So Moses leads the Israelites through the wilderness towards the promised land. But it was not long until the people started to turn to other gods and began doubting God's provision. Meanwhile, God meets with Moses on Mount Sinai, and he gives him a set of 10 commandments, and he gives him the law. The law is 613 laws on how you can stay in relationship with the holy God, Yahweh. But the Israelites fail miserably at following the law. They continue to mess up, and they continue to do evil in the sight of the Lord. Then God gave Moses detailed instructions for building the tabernacle. The tabernacle manifested the presence of God, and there was a veil that separated the sins of man from the holy God. And once a year, only the high priest could go beyond the veil and make a sacrifice for all of Israel so they could be in relationship with God. Immediately after the construction of the tabernacle, Moses passes away, and Moses' successor, Joshua, is now in charge. And Joshua leads the Israelites into the promised land through several different battles. Joshua then divides up the 12 tribes of Israel into their land, and he gives a powerful speech at the end of his reign before his death and says, "Fear the Lord and serve him with faithfulness. Throw away your false gods and serve the Lord." But the next generation of Israelites completely turned from God. Then God appointed 12 judges to lead the Israelites to a holy relationship with him. But the judges also become corrupt. Then the Israelite people demand a king, so they anoint Saul to be their king, and he's tall, handsome, and a warrior, overall a perfect king. But Saul's addiction to power and pleasure eventually lead to his downfall. After that, God chooses a young man named David. God chooses David because David was a man after God's own heart. David was a young shepherd boy armed with just a slingshot and stones, who defeated the giant Philistine warrior Goliath by striking him in the forehead with a stone. So David became king, and he established Jerusalem as a city, and he brought the tabernacle there, and he had these big plans of building the temple in Jerusalem. But then he committed adultery and ordered a man to be put to his death, which led to his downfall. Next, David's son, King Solomon, successfully builds the Temple of God, a place where the Israelites could be in relationship with God. But Solomon's wicked sins caused him to fall too. In fact, Solomon's disobedience was so serious that it caused God to split the kingdom of Israel in two, creating the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. After roughly 208 years of evil kings in the northern kingdom of Israel, we get to the Assyrian captivity, where God called upon Assyria to invade Israel and take the Israelites captive due to their disobedience. God sent many prophets to the Israelites, such as Elisha, Elijah, Amos, and Hosea, to rebuke Israel for their sins and warn them of the coming Assyrians. But the people would not listen. They continued to do evil in the sight of the Lord. God referred to the Assyrians as the rod of his anger, which he used as a tool to punish the Israelites for their sin and idolatry. Moving forward to the southern kingdom of Judah, Judah was ruled by 20 different kings during its dynasty. Some were good and some were bad. One of the greatest rulers of this kingdom was King Josiah, the 16th king of the southern kingdom of Judah. And Josiah inherited an extremely corrupt kingdom from his predecessors. The law of Moses had been missing for several years, and the land was full of idolatry, sin, and evil. Josiah finally recognized how evil the people of Judah were when the missing law of Moses was found, and when the law was read out loud, he realized how far the people had strayed from God's commandments. This led Josiah to initiate major religious reforms across the land. Josiah then made a covenant to obey God's commandments, and all the people joined in. But the next generation reverted right back to their evil ways until eventually Jerusalem was taken over by Babylon. The Babylonian exile was divine punishment for the southern kingdom of Judah due to idol worship and a disregard for God's laws. God sent many prophets to the people of Judah, such as Zephaniah, Habakkuk, Jeremiah, even Isaiah, to rebuke Jerusalem of their sins and warn them of the coming Babylonians. But the people would not listen. They continued to do evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. And all throughout this time, there are these messages from God that one day there will be a messianic king from the line of David, and he's going to establish an everlasting kingdom. Several decades later, the people were released from Babylon and were allowed to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. So the people are finally back home, and this is when the prophet, Zechariah, prophesied about a coming king who will enter Jerusalem in a humble manner, riding on a donkey, bringing peace and salvation to his people. Although the Israelites found themselves in a hopeless situation, they continued to look forward to the arrival of their Messiah, who would bring salvation, deliverance, and peace to them. Here are some additional prophecies about the Messiah from the Old Testament or the Tanakh. He would be born of a virgin. He would be born in Bethlehem. There would be a messenger preceding him. He would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. He would be silent before his accusers. His hands and feet would be pierced. He would be buried in a rich man's tomb. And he would be called the Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and the Prince of Peace. Now, I implore you to read the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Read the historical eyewitness accounts of how Jesus lived, taught, died, and rose from the dead. Read it for yourselves and come up with your own conclusions. Thank you.